Good evening to all the participants watching this webcast. And we have with us today's faculty, CA Ruchi Bhatt. Irrespective of the bad health she has joined in this webcast, we are saluting for her efforts. And right now with that one is, I am introducing our faculty, today's faculty, CA Ruchi Bhatt. CA Ruchi Bhatt, Director, Indirect Taxations of E&Y. Before that one, she was Senior Manager. She was the Senior Manager, Saha Khandelwal, Jain and Associates Chartered Accountants. Senior Consultant, E&Y. And that one is, she has been that one ICWI's Chartered Accountant. And that one is before that Bachelor of Commerce in Accounting and Finance. So that she has a great experience in that one is in the MSME sphere. With this, we welcome to CA Ruchi Bhatt with that one is particularly irrespective of the bad health she has joined. Once again, we are many more thankful to her. With this, I am handing over this session to CA Ruchi Bhatt.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the brief background. We'll quickly start off considering. So today's agenda, I'll just briefly tell you that we kind of picked up three things for today's discussion. One is around auto PLI specifically. Out of all the PLI schemes, we've picked up auto today. Then followed by a mover scheme, and then last will be RoDTEP. Okay, so I'll be just sharing my screen. Let me know when you all can. Let me, sir, just confirm me when you see this. Is my screen visible, sir? Yes, it is. Okay, so okay. So quickly, I'll just, as I mentioned, three topics today's will be for today's discussion, auto PLI. Okay, and while I'll just keep in mind that the focus is going to be on MSME, but like in terms of OEMs, I don't think that will be more of relevance for MSME sector, but it's still good to know what the scheme is all about and what is in store. And then we'll take it up for mover and RoDTEP, which in any case is always relevant for even MSMEs. So in terms of PLI schemes, if you see, there are already few schemes which have come up and we've seen in the past how they have done it. So there was pharma, food, okay, then there was telecom sector which was there. So all these schemes have come up, and so there are different stages. Like for food, applications have gone and even the benefits have been awarded, whereas for pharma, the applications have been given, but yet the final list is yet to come out. Even for telecom, now the incentives have been granted. So even textile, if you see, the policy is out, but applications are still in process. So the operational guidelines in terms of the application is something which is yet to come up. And what I was being told that maybe we have had a separate session only on textile as well. So today I'll be taking more focused on PLI, which is for auto industry. So if you see auto industry, where the benefit was kind of considered, so the benefit is being taken earlier. So when the original scheme had come up, it was more for export linked kind of, that the benefit was somewhere getting linked to the exports which our entity has, and in both OEMs and auto components. But finally, when the scheme has come up, okay, recently it came up and the focus has now got shifted. So what was earlier more on export side, obviously the preliminary focus which is there, how can I just okay, so the focus was more earlier on export side, which is now shifted to EVs. So even the outlay, which was kind of the earmark funds which are there for auto PLI, has also gone down. So there is that way of sea change than what we had thought about and what has finally come up. And where we are today is that we have been given the notification and operational guidelines. First level, they've already out. Okay. But there is still maybe a list which is yet to come up. List of advanced automotive technology vehicles, what do they mean, and components. That is something which is yet not made available. So what is going to be the tenure of the scheme is, it will be for 5 years, and it starts with 22-23. So the incentive period will start from 22-23 till 26-27. So it's going to be for 5 years where the incentive will come, and it will be disbursed in the next year of the incentive. So first incentive will start flowing in from 23-24. Okay, so if you see what is going to be the benefit for, so if it is for OEMs, okay, it will be for battery electric vehicles, so and the hydrogen fuel cell. So currently IC engines that we have been kept totally out of incentive bracket for OEMs. But when it comes to auto components, that's not how they've done it. So generally there is a misconception, and since many of our clients who are into MSME will be more of auto components and not exactly on the OEM side. So a lot of auto component manufacturers have a misconception that this benefit is available only for EV. Okay, if they're manufacturing some EV components only, then they will get it. That's not how it is. While EV will still get some additional incentive, but they've not totally discarded the IC engine components. So that's a good news, I must say. So advanced automotive technologies, but not that all components are eligible. They will come up with a list which they consider more of as advanced automotive technology. Then there are some CKD, SKD kits where there are like assemblies which are there, and there are a few which are vehicle aggregates. So the CKD, SKD is like an entire assembly of the vehicle, whereas vehicle aggregates are more of some internal but assemblies, not exactly going into a child part. So they've given some indicative list over there as well. And that's what will get covered into a target sector for auto component. So our focus today of discussion will be more on the component side of it. If you see what is going to be the base year, a lot of discussion had happened around what should be the base year. So 1920 was kind of the base year that was decided for taking the comparative. So it's only the incremental which they'll be considering. And for considering the incremental revenue, they'll take 1920 to be a base year, because 1920 wasn't as affected by COVID as maybe 2021 was. Only last about 10 to 15 days of 1920 was COVID affected. Otherwise, it was a plain operational year, while there was still a dip into the auto sector into 1920 as on holistic demand basis, but still they've considered that to be a base, and incremental will be always considered for this in terms of the incentive. But for financial attributes in terms of the eligibility, whether the investment or the gross block which they have to consider, for that they will consider 2021 to be a year. And if you qualify, what is going to be the incentive that you will get? So 13 to 18% on an incremental sale as compared to 1920 will be the benefit that OEMs will get, whereas for component manufacturers it is between the range of 8 to 13%. That's for the IC engines. If the product is for EV vehicles, then the incentive will be increased by 5%. So 8 will become 13, like that. So it will be again in the range of 30 to 18% itself. So clearly IC engine components are also covered, but if the product is into EV, then those component manufacturers will get additional 5%. Obviously, this is subject to fulfillment of eligibility criteria. And what is that eligibility criteria? That also we'll just see quickly. Before that, I'll just quickly tell you what is going to be the eligible sales value. So it's total net sales. Net of GST will be considered as eligible sales. Okay. And for this is for vehicle segment, and for component segment, obviously it will be for the eligible component. So if any of the component manufacturers into both eligible as well as non-eligible, only to the extent of eligible components will be considered for that segment, and net sales will reduce the returns, allowances or discounts if there are any. What is also important is always it gets linked to investment. So what do they consider by investment? They have clearly defined in the operational guidelines what does investment mean. So expenditure for plant and machinery equipment is already obviously there. Even they've added associated utilities into this. Okay, then tools, jigs, fixtures, packaging, all of this is covered. Okay, what is associated of utilities, even captive power and EFT plants are there, which are covered. To the extent of even ITS infrastructure is also what they've thought about. What is totally excluded is land. Okay, so land cost nowhere will be considered for the purpose of eligibility investment. Okay. Only building to some extent pertaining to plant and machinery and utilities might get considered, but they have put a cap of 10% of the minimum new investment commitment which they've done. So to that extent, if you see, land will be totally out, and even building to a very limited extent only benefit will be available. So that's on the understanding of what the criteria is going to be. Okay, so in eligible products for OEMs, we spoke about, they're considering electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell for 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, even passenger vehicles. Commercial vehicles are also covered. They've even extended it to tractors, okay, which are normally, these are off-roaders. Rest all off-roaders like excavators and all are not covered, but tractor is something which they have still covered. So this is for OEMs. And for auto component manufacturers, these are 3 things which are eligible, as we spoke of: advanced automotive technology components, and these will be pre-approved. So there might be some agency that they will appoint who will approve whether this product fits into this. Somebody may be like ARAI, who will grant whether this product is actually advanced automotive technology. Then there are CKD, SKD kits of all, okay, which are there into again a battery electric vehicle or IC engine vehicle, commercial, passenger, and even tractor to that extent. And vehicle aggregates is something which they've given examples of what aggregates will mean, and they've typically include body, shell, chassis, engine, transmission, suspension, steering system, wheel assemblies. All these are covered into the vehicle aggregate. So frankly, this is a very broad level listing which is currently out. The detailed list is yet to be made available, and currently they are only into evaluation stage, that what will get covered into either one of these 3. We are awaiting that list. That will make it more simpler for us to understand if the product is really eligible. But that's about the product eligibility. There are few more criteria also which anyone will have to see and somewhere fulfill so that they become eligible for this incentive. This is for OEMs. Okay, so OEMs, if you see what they are saying, that the global investment of the group companies. So this group companies are global group companies. So they're covering not just India entities, but even global entities. And even within India, there are like more entities, JVs, which are all part of one group company. There's a definition also of a group company. All put together, OEMs for 4-wheelers rather than 2-wheeler and 3-wheeler, it should be minimum of 3,000. That is a gross block as on 31st March 21. And for 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers, it's again a similar of 3,000. For global group revenue, which is there, so they say that as on 31st March 21, again for the global group revenue, it should be minimum of 10,000. So OEMs by far and all the MNCs would largely cover this. Okay, but the criteria for new investment, this is very critical, that every new now if they have to become eligible for auto PLI incentive, auto OEMs will have to bring in 2,000 minimum crores into the 4-wheeler segment and 1,000 crore minimum into 2-wheeler segment. And if there is somebody who's entering the market newly, they were never into auto before, but they're entering it for the first time. So there are many new players which are now getting into EVs. Like maybe Ola, which we all know. So all these are new players. They were never into manufacturing. For them, they've created a different segment. So while there is no base criteria for them, but the investment criteria is a little higher for these ones. Okay, and this investment is to be done in a phased manner. Okay, and we'll see also how that is to be done. Now, this is for OEMs in terms of the eligibility criteria. If they become eligible, then what is the incentive that they will get? It is, as we said, it is from 13% to 18% range. Okay, and it will keep on, it is like a slab wise. So up to 2,000 crores, there will be 13% and so on. It will keep on increasing. What is expected is that in the first year, which is 22-23, all entities, I mean, OEMs should have a minimum of 125 crores of revenue, and only then they will be eligible. And then there is also a commitment that 10% year-on-year growth is something on the 125 crores is what they have to minimum achieve. The rest all, if they keep on increasing, obviously the incentive will keep on increasing. If they cross 10,000 crores, okay, over a period of 5 years, then 2% additional incentive will also be given. So this may go up. So depending on the turnover which they are being able to achieve, the incentive will keep on differing. So that's for the OEMs. We'll now see how this is just a sample working that we are doing, that if their base turnover, so 1920, if any of the OEM has 1,000 crores of turnover, and if actual turnover for these years turns out to be something like this, then what is going to be the benefit that they will get? So obviously for these turnovers, the minimum turnover criteria, where the year-on-year 10% increase is expected, for sure they will fulfill this. And after that, the incentive will be whatever is the actual turnover minus the base year turnover, is on that they will get the incentive. But important thing to be seen is actually the investment, because as we said, they have to cumulatively achieve about 2,000 crores of investment, and year on year how that investment moves is something which is being mandated. So they have to do this much of minimum every year. If they are not doing, and this is cumulative, 800 crores is actually incremental of 500 crores. These 300 are included in this. But this number has to be achieved year on year. Only then they become eligible. If for one of the years you don't put as much as what is expected, for that year no benefit will be granted. But next year, if you fill that gap and make it up, then you still get that benefit. So that's how this entire working will move. This is for two-wheelers. This is for except two-wheeler and three-wheeler. So maybe four-wheelers, then all passenger vehicles, all these are covered over here. When it comes to two-wheeler, three-wheeler, everything remains to be similar. It's just that the minimum investment criteria goes down, okay, from 2,000 to 1,000. Otherwise, the kind of working turns out to be exactly same. Now we'll move to component champion incentive scheme, and this is more relevant for again MSME sector, and that too, not that way investment criteria is not too low, but still could be relevant for us to see. Now, like what we saw for OEMs, even for component manufacturer, again they're talking about global group level revenue, where they're expecting that global investment, so gross block as on 31st March 21 should be 150 crores of minimum 150 crore, and whereas the global group revenue should be a minimum of 500 crores. Again, global would mean any MNCs where they have global presence, and even within India, if there are multiple entities, all will be put together seen for 500. What is important? And then the investment criteria is again minimum of 250. We all have to remember one thing, that for eligibility criteria, they may consider a global revenue. But when it comes to investment, that has to be done by the one entity who's making that application. So this is important. There, they may not add everything. And this is all true for only in respect of the products which are eligible. So for here, it can be for the entire auto business. So if any entity who has got auto as well as non-auto business, then these criteria have to be seen only for auto business. Even after doing that, when it comes to investment, it has to be seen more for the eligible products. There could be a possibility that few of the products become eligible, few are not eligible. Then the investment could be either fully for eligible, obviously will be counted. The one which is fully for non-eligible, obviously will be out. The one which is common for both, it may get considered, but that those operational guidelines are not yet out. So we'll have to wait and see how that moves. So that's on the component champion incentive scheme in terms of the requirement. Okay. What is going to be the benefit for them? As we spoke, it is between 8 to 11%. Okay. And around 13% if it totally crosses 1250. So like OEM, it will keep on increasing along with how the turnover increases year on year. Okay, there is again a minimum criteria of 25 crores of sales which happens in the first year. And year on year growth of 10% and 25% is minimum what every component manufacturer will have to achieve. Over and above, if they cross 1250, they will get 2% additional. If the product is for electric vehicle, then the incentive is 5% higher, okay, of each of these criteria. But the only rider that they have put it, that if the component manufacturer is for IC engine, then in the 5th year, that is which is the last year of incentive, there the benefit will come down to 90%. It will not be fully, because again, the intention is to promote more of electric vehicles, and that too 5 years down the line, they would be looking at maybe more greener vehicles than the IC engine. So they're reducing incentive a bit, but still it's 90%, which is still a major chunk. So that's on the component champion scheme. We've just done a similar working that we had done it for component manufacturer. The only changes that you will see is the minimum investment, the minimum turnover criteria is much lower, because in OEMs it's 125. It's for components it's 25. And the comparison to base year will continue to be same. What is different is again the cumulative investment that happens year on year, which keeps on increasing. Here it's put together total of 250 crores. So again, the working is being done similar way, and the incentive has been calculated just as a reference, or what you can see. So this is about the scheme. This is about the working and the incentive. There are a few additional criteria which everyone will have to consider. One is the value addition criteria. So they are saying that the minimum 50% domestic value addition is required for this. What does this mean is that, if your product has a very high import component, then it may not be eligible, but it has to fulfill a 50% value addition within India, which has to be done. They have also given a formula how it is to be calculated. There might be a capping for per applicant that they may come up with. Okay, but they are also saying that if you have taken other scheme benefits, like there is FAME scheme which was announced earlier, or ACC batteries, which will become part of component also, auto component, or any other state incentives. So there are many other states who are giving incentives. There are other EV policies, like Maharashtra has one EV policy, Gujarat, rather about 13 states have their own EV policies, which cover even component manufacturing. So they are saying that this incentive which is given in PLI is over and above that incentive, that will continue as is, because this is a central scheme, whereas states might want to give any other incentive, they can continue. So these are some of the additional criteria which somebody will have to consider, okay, while looking at the eligibility. Okay, and then there is a process also which is given. This is a very high level process which is there. The detailed process is yet to be out. They may appoint a PMA who will look at all the applications, and one testing agency who will approve the product also. So this kind of scheme is actually, there is a fixed earmarked funds from government. So it's kind of only the top applications where the incentive is where the investment is more, okay, those will maybe get the preference. So it's going to be kind of a ranking wise. It's not all that who put application will go through. There will be some ranking criteria that they will put it, and only those will get it. So that's on the PLI side. I think this is just a referencer for the cumulative investment, how that is to move, and the minimum investment, minimum turnover criteria, just a referencer that we are putting. So are there any questions on this PLI scheme? I'll take a pause, or else then I'll move to more, or should I take all the questions towards the end, sir? How should we do this? Are there any questions already posted? I can't see them as of now. So we'll maybe complete the whole session today, and then we'll move on to the question and answer session. Maybe whatever questions you have, please post them on the chat. After the session, I'll take up each one of it. So this is another scheme, manufacturing and other operations in warehouse. Since we were talking about auto PLI, which is also one of the capex related incentive, this could also be relevant for a lot of companies, is because this is again linked with capex as well as even for raw material. But again, major incentive can come up from capital. So this scheme is actually so we all are aware of warehousing provisions under customs, which have been always there since a very long time, and even manufacturing in a warehouse, which was also allowed for a very long time. So conceptually, it's not something which is new, just that they have revamped this scheme from 2019, and many of the clients or many of the importers or even manufacturers are opening up to this scheme. So some of the important criteria or some of the important features which are making it more attractive is that the minimum eligibility criteria is not very stringent. Okay, any importer can think of actually going in for this. There isn't any investment limit or any turnover limit for making an application. That way it's pretty simple. Then you don't even have to consider opening up and taking up some new premises or taking up a new plant. Your existing plant itself can be converted into a private custom bonded warehouse license, which we'll now call a mover license. So what happens over here, it's a basic operational mechanism. How it works is that goods can be imported and deposited into a warehouse by way of filing a bill of entry for warehouse, but then you don't pay custom duty. So traditionally also many of the wholesalers, they import in bulk, keep it in warehouse and remove in piecemeal on payment of duty, so that the cash flow gets saved of upfront custom duty payment. Okay, now the kind of an extension is you can even do a manufacturing activity over there. Then clearance can be for either home consumption, or export. So it's not mandatory that you export directly from here. You can even remove it domestically. And while you're removing domestically, you will have to pay the duty. That's the only difference. And maintaining the records of movement of goods, because these are duty-free goods which are coming in. So what is the benefit over here? Duty deferment in case of import of capital goods. So if you're talking about capital goods import, which is generally about 7.5% or 10% of BCD, which becomes a cost. Okay, what this scheme allows benefit is that you can import without payment of duty. And this is a deferral scheme. So understand there's a difference between this scheme and maybe a EPCG, where there is an exemption subject to export obligation fulfillment. Here the obligation is not much, but at the same time, it's only a deferral system. It's not an exemption. So you can import without payment of duty that machinery, keep it in your plant, use it for a while. And whenever you are clearing it, whether you're selling it or domestically clearing, that time you will have to pay the duty. But the duty is not again a depreciated duty. It's kind of the duty that you had saved at the time of import. So it's only a cash flow benefit. It's a deferral benefit. Eventually you will have to pay that much. But if you're using a capital asset for a very long time value of money is something where you earn better than actually investing into that duty amount before. Okay. Then in case of import of other than raw material, capital goods like raw material, same way you can import without payment of duty. On the outward side, if you export, okay, then there is nothing that you will have to do, because you imported without payment of duty. Intention is to not export any taxes. So you import without payment of duty, you manufacture, you export, and your exemption continues that you got. So originally when you imported, it was a deferral, but just because you exported, now the deferral turned out to be an exemption. But when you actually clear it domestically, that time you will have to pay the duty and calculate that. Okay, that's how it works for the raw material part of it. Then the question that any of the importer or exporter will have is, this scheme obviously looks more interesting, attractive, because we are getting upfront deferral, but then it may come up with some of the additional compliances. So yeah, it does. Okay, but they are not as stringent. There has to be a warehouse keeper. So any designated person within the organization can be a warehouse keeper. There are some monthly returns which are to be filed. Then there are some operational guidelines which are there in terms of logs. Then whatever records are to be maintained. Then how the area is covered in terms of security, and then maintaining those records. And it obviously will have some possibility of audit from departmental side, because they're obviously giving you some benefit at the time, they will want to monitor it. So that's on the compliances which are there. Then process workflow, how this will work. So we high level, again, you can look at the process workflow. So there outside India, from where you're importing, which payment of duty you can import, which is normally happening currently. The other option is you pay import without payment of duty. Okay, and use it and keep it in the PCBW license. Then when it's a domestic procurement, it's like any other normal procurement. There is nothing that changes. GST will be charged. As such, there's no benefit on that front. In terms of other, if you're buying from other customs bonded warehouses, it's like they have imported, they've kept it, and they are selling it to you. So the incentive can continue to you as well. On the outward side, if you're exporting, no custom duty payment because eventually you exported. If you give it to another custom bonded warehouse, okay, it's a bond to bond transfer, you only have to endorse it, again no duty payment. And if you're domestically clearing, then you will have to file a bill of entry for home consumption. So this kind of a little bit of additional compliance which is there, that for all the imports which are into bond bill of entry for warehouse, there will be a one corresponding bill of entry for home consumption. So this is kind of a little additional burden of compliance which is there for all the importers and exporters. Then payment of custom duty, because now you're domestically clearing, the benefit that they had given you at the time of import won't continue. And it will be for GST purposes, it's like any other normal domestic sale. Okay, it's a supply under GST which will attract GST like in the due course. Nothing changes over there. And there are FAQs which are clearly talking about this, which is little different for GST when it comes to the PCBW. Earlier, what they have given as a clarification that they had already clarified under GST that whenever the import is for a custom bonded warehouse, no IGST to be paid at that point in time. Only when you file a bill of entry for home consumption from a bonded warehouse license, that time the importer will have to pay import IGST. So to avoid twice IGST instance on this, but that is something which they've kept it specifically under GST for routine custom bonded warehouse licenses. But when it comes to mover, they have made it pretty simple that you charge on your output side like any other normal sale. Okay, and then it's not that the buyer will have to pay that IGST as an importer. So that's about the overall process flow which is there for mover. Then what are the operational issues which are to be seen, that how it is going to impact in terms of the benefits, whether it's the cash flow impact, okay, the BCD benefit, then non-availability of or industry rate. This is quite critical because the moment any importer and exporter becomes a mover license holder, they lose out on the all industry rate duty drawback benefit. And even now, which I'll be covering later, even roadmap benefit will not be available. So kind of you'll have to weigh down which one is better, whether they should have the upfront exemption or they want to go for all industry rate drawback. Okay. Then some of the other impacts also to be seen more from an accounting perspective also, because it's a deferral scheme. So how accounting of this benefit is to be done is something which we'll have to see closely. Even income tax depreciation on these capital goods, something which should be seen closely. Transitional issues is about existing, how they would have some stocks which are there, how those will move to more license holder. There could be some open EPCGs, how they will come out. So these things need to be aligned quite closely. And then there are some operational changes which are to be done by the license holder for a smoother operations which are there. So this on the other key considerations, some clarifications are still awaited as to whether benefit is available for even 100% indigenous procurement of raw material or post payment of custom duty. Then is there a possibility of subcontracting or testing and repair, because this is very common for any manufacturing facility to have this. Then can there be a depreciation benefit, is something which industry is kind of pushing but not yet out. So some of the things are getting clarified through FAQ and some are still unanswered question. 3 different schemes are something which everyone will have to kind of consider while they're weighing their options, is whether to consider EPCG, whether to go for advanced license for raw material or against mover. Okay, because see, when somebody has higher exports, okay, then EPCG might work better, because for a reason that then it becomes an exemption and not really deferral. Okay, because then they don't have to pay at all that custom duty vis-a-vis a mover where there is a possibility. This is upfront exemption, these are duty deferral. So is on the advanced license, this is upfront exemption. The only question is that in either of these cases, whenever there is export, there is no payment. So either ways, for exporter, the benefit continues to be similar. But for especially for capital goods, there's always going to be deferral for under mover, which would be still lesser benefit, I would say, as compared to EPCG. Okay. Then other parameters are also required to be seen as to what is the obligation fulfillment requirement. Here, obviously, since it's upfront consumptions, the obligations are on a higher side while they are not there for more. Then bond security, then availability of drawback. This is again one critical criteria which needs a comparison, is whether, because for EPCG license holders, drawback is still available while it is not there for more, but it's also not there for advanced license. So weigh your options clearly, which one we should maybe advise our clients to get into. And only then, so at the beginning of any such discussion, we should have the evaluation done, which is the best options for them. And accordingly, we should put forth the best one. Okay, and so that the benefit is maximum for our clients. So that's only comparison of the mover scheme. Okay, now I move to the next topic for today's discussion is roadmap scheme, okay, which is again quite a new one. We all have been hearing about this scheme for about more than a year now, and now somewhere the clarity is out as to how the scheme will work. So this was something which was thought about, and there's a background around it. That earlier, if you remember, we had MEI scheme, okay, and which was also somewhere mentioned that the intention was kind of twofold for MEI scheme. One was for compensating the, again, non-taxable, non-creditable taxes, and also it was mentioned that kind of it is to offset the infrastructural inefficiencies which are there in India in terms of maybe transport facility or maybe road network or connectivity to ports. To compensate all that, government came up with this benefit of MEIS, which was around 2% to 5%. Okay, and it was kind of directly a percentage of the export value, and that amount was given by way of a scrip. That scrip could have been used for payment of import duty, or it could have even got sold off as well. So that's on the background of MEIS. Now what happened? So if you see, MEIS has been at the forefront for all the incentives which are there. Recently, we all are aware that they had kept this incentive for on hold, maybe on account of want of funds, but they've again opened it up, and now clients have started applying and getting also for older period. But this was still last year. So and why it was still last year, and why this scheme kind of got discontinued. So we all have we are aware that somewhere US had questioned this scheme, this benefit which India was offering, and they somewhere had an apprehension that this is kind of a direct incentive which India is giving to exporters as a percentage of export value, which is not in line with general WTO guidelines. Okay, because this is again not competitive enough to do this. So this got questioned, and it went up to it went into kind of lot of discussions and deliberations. And somewhere the ruling came in that that this is something which should not be given, and they mentioned that somewhere the report was given that India should withdraw the scheme. Okay, while India did not agree with this, and we had our contention to say that this is not exactly as a incentive which is just to compensate, just to give benefit to exporters. It was more of to compensate for some of the taxes, duties, and also for as I mentioned, some infrastructural inefficiencies within country. So we filed an appeal against that ruling also, but unfortunately this is kind of got stuck because there was no appellate authority at that point in time with WTO. So this is got on hold as of now. But nevertheless, somewhere we got the hint that this scheme may not really work in its shape and size that it is currently. So somewhere government decided to move on without this scheme, and this got discontinued from 31st December last year, 21. was the last period for MEIS application. Then what came up is this new scheme, which is RoDTEP. So remission of duties and taxes into export products. So they made it more clear. So what was not coming out as clearly into MEIS scheme, whether this benefit is available for non-credible taxes which are there in the product, export product, that got kind of cleared into this particular scheme, that they made it very categorically clear that this is about remission of duties and taxes into export product which are non-credible. So what happened is that they kind of again set aside some estimated outlay of about 50,000 crores for this scheme. What the idea was that the scheme, it's kind of decided to reimburse or remission of the duties which are central, state, and local level, which are actually going into the cost of the product which is getting exported, but these are non-creditable. Okay, so GST, to that extent, the normal GST that is getting charged is again ITC is available, so that is not a cost, be it on the import side or the domestic procurement side. But some of the cases where some of the state VAT levies which are still continuing, excise duty on fuel, electricity duty, which are kind of becoming embedded into the production cost, that is something which they wanted to compensate. So what they did, that 1st January 21 onwards, they came up with a press release and implemented RoDTEP. So from 1st January 21 itself, people were eligible for RoDTEP benefit, and exporters were supposed to start charging on their export side, start taking this benefit on export side. So kind of IceGate made that change into the shipping bill format itself, and they made it applicable and eligible for at least opting for RoDTEP. So people who were into exports, they started claiming this. That time there was no clear clarity as to who all will be eligible, what is going to be the rate, are there any restrictions, but somewhere the idea was that you start claiming it, we'll come up with a rate and other operational guidelines in due course. And even how this will be credited, whether it's more of only a refund or it is similar to MEIS script, nothing was kind of clear at that point in time. But somewhere at least the benefit had kicked in from January 21 itself. Now recently, around last month in August 21, government came up with the rates, okay, for RoDTEP. And these rates were given HSN wise for different products, different rates had come up. How they calculated is in the meantime, they've taken a lot of representations from industry. There was some templates which were shared with a lot of industries to understand what was kind of a cost of all these taxes, so that they had their data ready with them. And basis that they came up with the rates which are given HSN wise. So while they made the scheme effective from 1st January 21 itself, the rates came only in August 21. So what they did, that they kind of went back till 1st January and they applied those rates. So whatever rates were coming up till August 21 into the shipping bill, those are all notional rates, okay? And a lot of clients must have asked you this question, whether these are final rates and whether we get it at this value. Also from an accounting perspective, whether we should recognize the revenue at the rate which was mentioned in the shipping bill. All these speculations came to an end when the rates finally are now out. We had to only consider those rates and apply it to the FOB value. Okay, there can be even a possibility of some value cap, which is generally there even for like all industry rate duty drawback. So they may give a percentage of the export value, or at places where this value may exceed, they may put a kind of a per unit cap also for this benefit. So that's how this came up recently. You all might have seen it for your respective clients also, how this will come up. Okay, they have given even some of the operational guidelines, and that come about, I believe, last month itself, on the operationally how this will really work. While the rates got out in August 21, the operational guidelines came only very recently in September itself. So what they say that earlier, if you see, MEIS scheme always used to come up only after the realization of export proceeds from overseas customer. They've now kind of changed it here. While there is always the condition of receipt of foreign currency, but the benefit disbursement is not linked with that. You will get the benefit beforehand, but it will always come up with the condition that you will have to get the sale proceeds from your overseas customer. So that's on the proceeds part of it. How the mechanism will work, it's again end-to-end digitization, and unlike MEIS scheme, this scheme is being monitored by CBIC. Okay, so this is a very important point which everyone will have to remember, that earlier in MEIS scheme, all the applications, issuance of scrip, everything was happening on a DGFT portal because it was under trade ministry. But now, in terms of the operational guidelines, they have shifted the entire work to CBIC. So it's a common customs portal, which is ICEGate, which will do all this work. Okay, while the funds may flow from trade industry because this is part of foreign trade policy, this road scheme per se got added in as one of the schemes into Chapter 4 of foreign trade policy. So where you have advanced license, there they've added one more scheme, which is RoadTep. Okay. While MEIS and slight change and getting little technical, but those who have read foreign trade policy, or MEIS scheme or SCI scheme, or even old days, all those different focus product, focus market, these schemes were all Chapter 3 schemes. Okay. And Chapter 4 was for advanced license, 5 for EPCG, and so on and so forth. Here they've added this scheme into 4th chapter. Okay, so little different mechanism, and which is more of incentive really, and not. So there is that way little difference in these two schemes, which are there. Duty remission schemes, which are under Chapter 4, whereas duty incentive schemes, which are there in Chapter 3. That's how it changed. So even the mechanism of application has now gone to CBIC. The necessary procedure for applying for the scheme and implementation in terms of the IT platform is being done. It's been in place. CBIC was ready with it. Okay. Then there is a possibility of, even if, let's say, if there's no receipt of foreign currency, or if it is obtained by way of fraud, then penalty can also be levied for such a situation. What is also important is look at these ineligible categories who are there, which got prescribed under the scheme. So these are important ones because some of the clients or some of the exports may not be really eligible for RoadTep scheme as such. So export of imported goods, which are there are some conditions where the export of imported goods in same or substantially the same condition as is basis, if there is an export, that will not be eligible. Transshipment, where goods had come in India only for routing it to other country, those will not be eligible. Those which are apply where there is an export duty, they are also not eligible for this. Then what is if the export is restricted or prohibited, okay, and the benefit still somebody is exporting by way of some approvals, obviously those are not covered. Then this is also important that supply by DTA to SEZ, which is generally normal course, this gets considered as a deemed export, but they're not eligible for RoadTep. What is a little more regressive step, which is there, is that all the EOUs and the mover license holders, they are also not being given this benefit. Okay, while there has been a lot of representation which is going on this particular point, because if you see, be it EOU, EHTP, or even mover, they're only getting benefit of import duty, but rest all taxes which are actually getting remitted under RoadTep scheme, they're not getting any exemption on that. So if they are not getting any such exemption and they are still paying it and they are exporting, then they should be treated at par with any other exporter, and everyone should get the same benefit. So that's something which there is a lot of representation which is happening. We are waiting if these people also will be treated at par. Otherwise, they will lose out on this benefit. And if you see, these are the people who are actually more into exports, and that's why they've got into 100% EOU or EHTP. So losing on to this benefit could be little regressive step, but we don't know. We are waiting for the confirmation on that. Then jobbing contract, if there is some manufacturing, that may also that would not be eligible. Exports to non-EDI ports, Again, there are few ports, especially the land customs stations, which are not connected with customs EDI portal. They are still maybe operating manually, located at remote, far off places. Those are kept out of roadtap benefit only more for operational reasons, because it's difficult to disburse this benefit. Rest all is taken care of through EDI only. So they are out, and exports goods which have been taken into use after manufacture. So it's more of used product exports. If second-hand goods, if they are getting exported, those will not be eligible for roadtap benefit. So as we spoke of, out of the people who are left out and they are not eligible for the benefit, so then they're still kept the door open. They're still considering that for these people they may give benefit, which is advanced license holder or EOU or unit situated in SEZ. They're saying that we may decide that to give this benefit or no to these people. So they have got the authority, and sometime they may come up with this. What is still, if you see, mover is not featured over here. So whether they will consider something which is not even kept into the bracket of consideration is something which we'll have to see through. So that's on the eligibility and ineligibility criteria. How it is to be filed, and this is quite new, which we all have to see, is filing of roadtap claim. Okay, this, as I mentioned, these guidelines are about 2 to 3 weeks old. So everyone may not have gone through this, how it is to be applied. So starting point is going to be like MEIS in your shipping bill, you will have to opt for roadtap, which people have started doing since long time. Then what is to be done is that after this is done, and when you get the script and how the script will come up, we'll see. So whenever you get the script, that script can be used. It's going to be e-script, not exactly how MEIS was coming up. It's more of electronic credit ledger, which is there, like how we have it for GST. Similar, we have it for even customs now, where more of the debit credit will happen. Okay, and that debit, that one can be used for making payment of BCD. The rates will be within the range of 0.01% to 4.3% across about 8,000 plus products, which they've given in basis HSN. So see the rate range. While the MEIS had more of from 2% to 5%, here the rates are much lower as compared to MEIS. Okay, but this is what it is, and they have calculated, they have got some scientific base of coming up with these rates. So many of the products where the rate was much higher for MEIS has gone down to that extent, but still it's an incentive which anyone should, if it's available, should be claimed. Okay. Then procedurally, you file it in the shipping bill, as I mentioned. Then value and the rate will be there as a part of shipping bill also, and that would be cap of 1.5 times the market value for the value for FOB value of export, which is to be considered. Then EGM is to be filed by the shipper line. Okay, and then that is kind of a basic compliance which is needed. Once that is done, then the scroll gets generated. It's like a scroll is something which we even today have it for all industry rate or IGST refund, where the scroll gets generated and the amount scroll number is there. So it's here the scroll is actually not really a duty credit, or I wouldn't say it's like a cash refund, which generally how it is for IGST refund or all industry rate duty drawback. That's not how it will work for roadtap. It's more of only a scroll for duty credit in the electronic credit ledger. It's not hard cash, but it's more of that it's been got approved from customs portal. Once that is done, then the exporter will have to actually apply for the script again on the same portal. It's more of receiving the approvals now. Now, please allow me, give me the script. So why the script and why not generally use it? Because something, if it was only to be used for a self-use, it was only electronic credit ledger would have sufficed, like how we have a GST credit ledger. But when it comes to these scripts, some of the exporters may not have any imports. So what do they do with this amount if it's not going to be sellable? So to make it more of transferable, they've come up with a concept of e-script. So for all the scrolls which are there, you go for applying for e-scripts. Once the script is issued, again, it's a e-script. It's there as a part of your credit ledger, duty credit ledger on customs. Once that script is available, you can use it for making payment of customs duty if you have so. If you do not have any import duty to be paid, then you might as well sell it. And that's allowed. These e-scripts are very much transferable. You can sell it, and your buyer will then use it again for import of for payment of BCD. What is also important is here we're only using it for making of payment of BCD. It will not be even used for any SWS payment like how we used to use it for MES. It will be solely used only for BCD, and rest all payment has to be done in cash. Like maybe IGST, SWS, everything will be made in payment will be made in cash. So this is to be done within a period here from the date of its creation. In the scroll, you should actually make the application and get the script. If it is unutilized, so somebody missed to apply that e-script within a period of a year from the scroll, it's not going to go waste. But then they will issue you one consolidated script for all the balance amount port-wise for all the scrolls for which you did not apply for e-script. So it's not going waste, just that you will get a consolidated one script. It's better we apply it ourselves so that we get it faster, first thing. Secondly, we can even divide it the way we want it. Some of it, if we want to use it for self-use and partially want to sell off, you break it up accordingly. Apply for those scripts separately. Use it for yourself. The other one you can sell it. Why is it so important to have two different scripts? Is because partially used script is something which you cannot transfer. So if you want to kind of use partially for your own import purposes and partially for selling it across, you better split it and apply that e-script accordingly so that you end up not blocking your funds into one script. Okay, that's something which we'll have to see closely. And if any of the provisions of the act are contravened, then obviously the cancellation of duty credit is something which is possible. So if we do not get the foreign currency, what is there in the export, this script can also get cancelled. So what they have also clarified is that export to Nepal, Bhutan, and Myanmar will be available only upon realization of sale proceeds unless irrevocable LOC, and that too in freely convertible currency. Otherwise, if it's export to Nepal, Bhutan, and Myanmar is not against LC or it's in INR, then you won't get the benefit at all. And there they have also kind of covered the requirement procedure, recovery procedure. So if it's like additional benefit which is given, they're kind of linking it to the customs law. How in customs, if there is any demand, unpaid demand that gets recovered. Similarly, this will also get this. If let's say you do not receive the export proceeds, then they will start the recovery under Customs Act, like how generally it happens even for all industry rate duty drawback, where the recovery is there under customs. So just a brief comparison that I have put it for MES and industry-wise. There are few chapters which are totally left out of roadtap benefit, and these are important ones. Chemical products which are under chapter 20 and 29, then pharma products which are under chapter 30. And there are a few iron and steel related articles made up of iron and steel. They are also kept out of roadtap benefit. Maybe somewhere the idea was that they're already getting compensated with different schemes. That's kind of what came up, but we're not sure how what exactly would be the reason, but they are kept out. The overall feel is that if you compare the rates, and we've just given industry wise how that will work. So for MES, auto industry 2 to 3% it was there, but roadtap is 0.5 to 2.2, so average, and rather some of it are much on the lower side, so there is a major that way loss. So overall, if you see, the rates are always on a lower side for roadtap as compared to MES, but the overall coverage of products is much more than MES. But nevertheless, for the individual exporter, the benefit has gone down substantially, and this was also one of the top lines revenue which clients had, which now has reduced. Okay, so that's something which we'll have to consider. So I think that's it from my side. right now on the coverage part of it. Maybe, sorry, I just maybe rushed it a bit. But if there are any questions now, I'm happy to take up. Pardon me, today I just had, as he mentioned, just had some little illness since morning. So maybe I just rushed into some of the parts of it. But I hope I could, and I guess I covered whatever I wanted to cover and make it more. Now I would want to make it more interactive. You let me know if there are any questions which are there.
Ma'am, there will not be interactive platform, so that I am asking the question on behalf of the participants.
Okay. So would they be putting it on chat, or you will read it out to me?
No, I will ask by that one is from my team.
Okay. So let me know.
How does PLI help, ma'am? Last question.
Okay, so how does it help? It's like a cash refund that the manufacturers are getting. Obviously, it's an incentive. And if you see the percentage, also they're quite, so 8 to 13% is quite of the sales revenue, eligible sales revenue, as compared to the base year. So that turns out to be quite a substantial number, and it's a hard cash that gets reimbursed back. So that way, it is eligible and helpful.
What are the circumstances under which an applicant may be ineligible for the scheme of that auto PLI schemes?
Yeah, so I think two critical ineligibilities, or I would say a couple of them. I'll just list them down quickly. One is that a product should be eligible. That's the most important part. So currently, since for component manufacturers the list is not out, so we don't know. But since and then there is another one where the basic eligibility criteria which is to be seen. Okay, so where maybe your total gross block as on 31st March 21 wasn't 500, 300, and your global revenue wasn't 500 as on 31st March 21, then you will be out. But if I get the question correctly, if somebody is asking that what happens after I apply and then I'm not eligible, so maybe if the question is more from a perspective that the original eligibility criteria is something which a client has done or a component manufacturer is going through with it, so they have the required gross block of 31st March 21, they have the revenue of 2021, they are even planning to make that investment also of 250. Okay, and they are showing in their estimates that we'll be bringing in that much over a period of 5 years, and they make an application and assuming the product is also eligible. So I think in terms of, let's say, all the eligibility criteria are fulfilled and they've made the application, and if your question is more that in spite of being fulfilling eligibility criteria conditions, is there a chance that somebody may not get it? So yes, there is a chance. Okay, it may so happen that even after going through all these steps, somebody may not go through. Okay, then the reasons could be, one is the testing agency did not approve the product, which maybe a manufacturer thought that it's fitting in the list which would come out, but eventually the testing agency didn't give that go ahead. That could be one reason. The second reason could also be that as I mentioned, it's going to be on a ranking basis. It's not going to be that everyone would get it. Okay, so those who would fare better, so in terms of their investment or the technology which somebody is bringing is much better, then somebody is now investing heavily into electric vehicles, all these kind of ratings and the criteria will be there, and accordingly they will pick it up. So if and they have a fixed outlay, so it's like CA exam where you clear and you are through. Okay, that's not how it works into maybe other education where your name should be there in the list, and others how they're doing would also matter, and only few first list get closure, and post that somebody may still not get through. It's like going to be that.
Whether RoadTap scheme is different from MEIS scheme? If yes, in what manner?
So it's actually, in terms of scheme, I would say you have to consider them differently. You can't really say that it's more of a replacement. So for exporter, it's just that I was getting one benefit and now I'm getting the other one. But eventually, in terms of the objective or in terms of operational mechanism, even in terms of where it is located in the FTP, there is a difference how it will work. Just can you excuse me for a minute? Just you will have to excuse me. Just give me a second, sir. I'll just come back and then I'll take next question.
Yeah. Can a factory which is solely into manufacturing goods which are being sold in the domestic market eligible for applying for manufacturing and other operation in a bonded warehouse?
Sorry, sir. Can you come again? Can you tell me the question one more time?
Can a factory which is solely into the manufacturing goods which are to be sold in the domestic market eligible for that one is applying for manufacturing and other operation in the bonded warehouses?
Yeah, rather a very, very valid question, and thank you for taking this up, which I should have taken during my session itself. Is that yes, it is very much possible. It has no condition whatsoever that you should have export, and rather this is also a very good case for people to consider going in for this when they want to get a deferral for the capital goods import. Because when it comes to raw material, frankly, if your entire production is going to go into domestic market, then somebody may not really want to consider this benefit. But even for those cases where it's an import of raw material but the entire production is going into domestic market, still this policy can be relevant only to the extent of deferral. Then there's a cash flow saving which happens if your production cycle is too long. So let's say raw material gets imported and gets used up after a very, very long time, then you may want to defer that duty payment, and when you use it and domestically clear it, that time you pay. That could be one reason why entire domestic manufacturer can still consider going in for more. The other and more attractive benefit is actually capital goods import. Since they don't have any exports, they can't really consider EPCG also. They won't be able to fulfill the export obligation. So then for them, what still becomes relevant is actually this one. Then they can import capital goods without payment of duty, and they get to use it for a very long time without payment of duty. Only let's say if they use this plant and machinery for 10 years, after that when they are clearing it, that time they'll have to pay. Till then, and it's a huge chunk. So if you see BCD component also for for a capital goods, which becomes a cost, is much higher. So that much at least gets deferred. They will have to, what is also critical is, remember, they will have to pay the duty saving only. It is not going to be depreciated value that they have to pay after 10 years. But still getting to use that money for 10 years, it still will have a cash flow benefit and some cost of capital saving over there.
Whether RoadTap is available on all products or on selective products, whether there is any country specific restriction or permission in the RoadTap.
Right. Again, a very valid question. So there is it's given product wise, and it's there almost for all products, frankly. Only the some chapters which have got left out are the ones which I spoke about. Some chemical products, some pharma products, and iron and steel chapter 71, 72, which are out of it. Otherwise, it's there for almost all the products, and there is no country specific criteria which is there. It used to be earlier in the focus market scheme, where there will be some markets which are specified that only if you're exporting to these countries, the export incentive will be there. That's not how it is. For RoadTap, it's there for all. It's only for Nepal and Bhutan, Myanmar that they've come up with a specific condition. Otherwise, it's there for all countries.
which taxes are intended to be compensated to the exporters in roadmap scheme?
Right. So there are some examples that I took it, and depends on, again, industry to industry. So especially fuel has still state VAT, which is not creditable. In any case, it's not creditable, and it being state VAT also, it becomes a cost. Then there are electricity duties. Then there are some other taxes, which are maybe some local taxes. Some may have, like OCTRA, LBT related, some such taxes, which did not get subsumed into GST. They still continue, and then there is no credit out of it. All of these put together, they've calculated for a product, and then they have come up with the rate.
Whether roadmap scheme is applicable only to the manufacturer and exporter of goods or to all the type of exporters?
It is actually to all type of exporters. There's only criteria of they have specified is at ineligible list. Otherwise, it's there for all manufacturers. It's for all products. It's actually linked with exports, not really with the manufacturing part of it.
What are the ineligible categories under the scheme, the roadmap scheme, for claiming benefits?
So I think there was one list which I displayed. Okay, and I'll just give you some examples out of it. So if these are second-hand goods export, then that is not eligible. Export to SEZ, supply to SEZ is not eligible. Export by EOU, EHTP, BTP, then mover license holders, these are not eligible. Even export by advanced license holders.
Ma'am, what about the EOU and FTWZ?
Yeah, so EOU license holders currently have been kept out of roadmap scheme. So are SEZs.
Okay. Can anyone claim the unlimited benefits on goods exported as per applicable rates, or are there any overall ceiling for the claiming the benefit?
So there are few products where they've come up with some cap. Okay, but that's cap per unit. So generally, like for all industry rate, for cars, there is a all industry rate percentage of FOB value, but they have also put one cap for per car. It's similar. They've also got it in some cases for roadmap. They've got per unit cap, but otherwise, and that's very product specific. But otherwise, as such as an exporter, if your product doesn't have any cap, okay, you may continue getting it unlimited benefit. The only, again, rider that I would, maybe one caveat that I would want to say is that it is always with the specific earmark funds from government. So what we have seen recently that happened, for SEIS especially, or some time back, it was also there for MEIS. So what happened recently for SEIS is that 1920 rates were not there for SEIS for a very long time. Now, finally, they've got the rates, but they have now put a cap of 5 crores of incentive for SEIS per IC. So that way, it may so happen, and that depends again on the funds which are available and which are kept separate for this particular scheme. If somewhere they believe that maybe they are exhausting those limits, they may put up a cap. But if that is good enough to take care of a lot of different incentives which are there, then it could be even unlimited one for all the exports.
Can a unit undertaking manufacture and other operation in a bonded warehouse imports capital goods without payment of duty? If yes, whether only BCD or both BCD or IGST on import is covered, or for how long is duty deferment available?
Yeah, so it's only BCD which is covered, and any manufacturer unit can take that benefit. Was that question for any manufacturer, or what is it at the beginning? Can you come?
Can a unit undertaking manufacture on other operation in a bonded warehouse imports capital goods without payment of duty?
Okay, yes. So yes, obviously, capital goods can be imported without payment of duty. BCD benefit is available, and how long is till the time you don't clear it domestically. Okay, so if you import a machinery and you keep it always in your premises, and maybe you even scrap it, and you are only selling scrap. So when you even sell a scrap, you will have to still pay the duty. Okay. Or if it always remains in your premises, you continue to get that benefit. So there is no as such set time limit which they've kept it. it is only till clearance that you will get the benefit of deferral.
And that one is in the PLI auto scheme, are greenfield projects and brownfield projects both allowed under the scheme?
Yeah, again, a very, very valid question, and thank you for taking it up. I missed that, and recently FAQs have come up for even auto PLI, and it is for both. It's for greenfield as well as brownfield. There's no specific requirement that it has to be a new project and a greenfield project. It will be overall both, and both the investments will be eligible for this.
It's a simple, that one is, I think so. Whether a proprietorship, partnership, and LLP could avail the PLI benefits. It's a simple question, I think so.
And yeah, but it's not maybe as simple. They're saying that it is a private limited company.
And another question is that, particularly,
yes, sir.
A factory has got MOO WR license. How could he claim the benefit of road tax?
As of now, you can't claim both. Okay, it is so mover license holders are out of the benefit for now. If you still want to kind of take the benefit, then you will have to come out of mover license. You can't avail both for the timing unless there is something which they clarify, that comes up from their side that it gets allowed, only then you can. Otherwise, the license holder cannot claim that benefit together.
An entity making export of goods directly to the outside India, as well as merchant exporter at the rate 0.1% under GST, can the entity claim RoTEF?
Yeah, they can. Yeah, I was just I was checking on that partnership and proprietorship question one more time. Okay, there are FAQs which are clearly saying that proprietorship, partnership, and even LLPs are not allowed under the scheme. Only private limited and public limited companies are covered in which are registered under Companies Act. Only those are eligible to get the PLI benefit, again subject to other eligibility criteria.
Capital goods have been imported under EPCG license to neutralize the BCD cost. Then what would be the implication on the business under RoDTEP?
Okay, so frankly, RoDTEP, when it is compensating, okay, it is not really only compensating the EPCG part of it. Okay, so they are, I mean, it's not just compensating the BCD benefit or BCD cost into the export product. So RoDTEP is clearly not considering, frankly, BCD. There are different schemes which are being there. Like you have all industry rate duty drawback, you have brand rate duty drawback, which are all been designed to kind of compensate the BCD cost into your export product. So RoDTEP is not actually for such cases. So under EPCG, even if you have got a BCD benefit, BCD exemption for your capital goods, that wouldn't really have an impact on exactly on the RoDTEP scheme. Okay. So there is no connection, but your question seems to be more relevant for advance authorization and mover license, because there, when it comes to raw material, if you have got that benefit on BCD side, then they are not giving a RoDTEP benefit. So somewhere the idea seems to be that they are trying to link the benefit only to the raw material exemption. Okay, so restricting RoDTEP is being linked more towards the raw material and not exactly to capital goods.
Whether RoDTEP would be awarded in the bank account similar to duty drawback?
No, not really. So as I mentioned, the duty, all industry rate duty drawback amount gets credited to your bank account, and the scroll is generated and amount gets credited. in here, that's not how it is. It will happen. It's kind of a hybrid method of all industry rate, duty drawback, and MEIS, because here scroll gets generated, but scroll is only for the purpose of credit into the credit ledger, but not exactly the amount that gets credited. Once the scroll gets generated, then you will have to apply for a e-script, and that script number is something which is to be used at the time of import for payment of BCD. There is no liquidation from government of e-scripts under RoadTap. You can liquidate it only by way of selling it.
If the entity not been able to mention the option of claiming a RoadTap in shipping bills in respect of the past transaction, what should the entity do now?
Yeah, so that's a very, very critical question, frankly. Rather, when the scheme was out, it was better that exporters, without even knowing whether their product will be eligible or no, they should have ideally put this together. But if they've not, then now the only criteria is to do this more like a request for amendment. There have been, if you see, there have been many different case laws so far. There have been a lot of litigation that has happened in the past, even for cases where people miss to apply MEIS, okay, in their shipping bill. And courts have time and again held that it's a substantive benefit and it should be allowed, and just a procedural lapse of not putting it on the shipping bill should not stop them from claiming benefit. So it's not a dead end. If somebody has missed putting it into shipping bill, please go ahead and apply for shipping bill amendment. Okay, it may not go through at the initial adjudication level. You may have to fight out till a maybe higher forum, but there have been some precedents already in exporters' favor so far, which you can refer, and you may still get through.
I think you have covered it. What is the broad procedure of claiming the benefit of the e-script under the RoadTap scheme?
Yeah, so you're right. I had covered it, but quickly I'll tell you that you will get a scroll number. You will have to keep an eye for all the shipping bills where the scroll is being generated. Once you get to see the scroll is being generated, then you will have to manually apply for the script, and you can then combine as many shipping bills as you want. It has to be done only one port shipping bills can be combined together, okay, for one script. It can be registered anywhere, used anywhere, but while for making an application, it can be only one port wise. You make an application for the e-script, the e-script gets issued, and then that can be used for making payment of BCD and also for even sell. That's how it will work.
Would it be mandatory to appoint a warehouse keeper in the factory license under 65, under
Yes.
Section 65 of the Customs Act?
Yes, there will be. You will have to designate a person. They've not really prescribed any specific qualification for this warehouse keeper, but more or less generally, the person in charge, maybe a factory head or maybe a stores person, is somebody ideally we can keep designate to be a warehouse keeper who has better visibility and better control of the entire material movement. Ideally that person should be made a warehouse keeper, but it's a mandate to have somebody who's more of like giving that ownership for the license holder.
Would all goods cleared from the said factory to be subject to inspection by the warehouse keeper or custom authority?
So actually that way none. It's not that every time the clearance is happening, a customs authority will have to inspect it or give their go ahead. That's not how it works. Okay. Even warehouse keeper is more of who's in charge of the overall material movement, not exactly that every clearance has to be kind of inspected by that warehouse keeper. So that's that way the material movement is quite fluid. It's only from a compliance responsibility perspective that the warehouse keeper will be appointed.
Is there any segregation in the budgetary outlay based on the vehicle power technology or fuel used, like BEV, hybrid, hydrogen fuel cell, IAC vehicle, flexi fuel vehicle?
As of now, they've not really come up with any specific allocation to each of these categories. What we know is the total outlay. So for now, we don't know whether there'll be something which is earmarked to EVs, something to hydrogen fuel cell, like that. If they will do, we are yet to see that so far.
Are eligible advanced automatic technology components used in major construction plant and equipments, mining machinery, special purpose vehicles, mobile cranes, dumpers, excavators, loaders, and unloaders incentivized under the scheme?
Doesn't seem so, and again, a very valid question and a very valid concern, but seems to be so. Wherever they've spoken about CKD, SKD kits or aggregates, it's all about the eligible vehicles like CVs, PVs, and tractors. They've not really gone ahead with off-roaders like excavators, dumpers, and all.
What is the threshold determined sales value for any approved company year-wise under this PLI scheme?
So minimum sale value is what is they have given. So if it's a component manufacturer, it starts with first year should be 25, year on year 10% increase to 25. That's what the minimum is. Beyond that, it can be that much you'll have to achieve for component. And for OEMs, it's minimum 125 crores in the first year, and then year on year it should increase by 10%.
How can one create an e-credit ledger in RoadTap scheme?
So frankly, you don't really have to create it separately. Now it's been made mandatory by IceGate to have your login credentials. You will see a tab separately coming up in that login credential itself, where you'll have to just keep an eye on getting the scrolls. Once the scrolls are issued, would be a tab to kind of make the e-script applicable, and you will see a dashboard covering all the e-scripts which are available with you.
Okay.
So still it's quite new, frankly. All the RoadTap disbursements are quite new. Not many have still really seen an operational much, but slowly, steadily it will start off.
What is the customs document form for movement of imported goods on which duty has been deferred to or from a unit undertaking manufacturer and other operation in a bonded warehouse?
Right, so it's actually exactly similar to any other bonded warehouse. There's no new document per se. So we all have known, like there are two types of license. Section 58, which is a pure only license where there's no manufacturing, and Section 65, which is manufacturing license. Both the cases, the document is at the time of import, you file into bond bill of entry, which is normally called, and under regulations, it is called bill of entry for warehousing. That gets filed at the time of import, and when you're clearing it from a warehouse, that time you file a ex-bond bill of entry, which generally we call into bond bill of entry and then an ex-bond bill of entry. And in normal parlance, it's called bill of entry for home consumption as well.
If
that's the only documentation.
If the imported capital goods are cleared for export after use, is depreciation available?
So if you are importing a capital goods, you are using it, let's say for 5 years, 10 years, whatever time, and you're exporting it back, okay. Then rather, there is no question of custom duty payment. So there is no need of actually any depreciation. Depreciation you would actually want only in cases where there is a duty payment, which happens normally in case of domestic clearance. But if you are importing capital goods, using it for some time, and eventually you are exporting those, then there is no custom duty payment even on capital goods. So then there is no question also for a depreciation, no requirement as it.
What is the procedure for surrender of license for a Section 65 unit?
Maybe I'll have to check, frankly, not part of it, but must be generally, like if logically we have to think it will be an application for surrender. They will see all your stocks which are there where there was a benefit which was taken, be it raw material or capital goods. They'll make you pay those duty, file the export bill of entries, and then you're out. Then you're through with it.
How a user can claim the benefit of this RoadTap scheme in the shipping bill?
So there is specific field which is added in a shipping bill, RDTPY, okay, where Y or N. So there is a specific field where you select that, so that it gets registered in their database that this so and so shipping bill has ticked yes for RoadTap. So there is one declaration specifically as a part of your shipping bill where there's RDTPY, which you'll have to pick up.
What is the procedure for transfer of the e-credit scripts?
Frankly, as I mentioned, not that we've also seen very closely how the transfer, and because it's still too new for everyone to actually get the script. But basis whatever we've read and what it appears, it's more of only IC to IC change will happen. That you will have to, like how even for MES it had become kind of online by DGF, but that was again for DGFT. Now CBSE would just make it that from one IC, this e-script then gets transferred to another IC and starts appearing into their electronic credit ledger by way of e-script.
What would be the role of DGFT portal in claiming rebate?
No, frankly, in terms of licensing with exporter, nothing. It's all been shifted to now CBSE. We don't have to do anything as such on DGFT website as far as RoadTap is concerned. The only maybe word of caution is that eventually the export proceeds forex receipt is something which gets confirmed on DGFT website by way of a EBRC, which someday might be relevant even for RoadTap, because internally CBSE and DGFT will have that much of data transfer, maybe that these are the shipping bills where still EBRC is not come up, but for those maybe CBSE has already disbursed RoadTap benefit. That kind of interplay might still continue, and that is something which to that extent we'll have to go to DGFT, okay, and keep an eye on our EBRCs. But otherwise, in terms of claiming the benefit or getting the benefit, there isn't anything which is specifically to be done by DGFT.
Whether the entity need to register at the port for the purpose of claiming and utilization and RoadTap benefits?
Port entity needs to be registered on CBIC portal, okay, on the IceGate portal. The port registration of scripts that way happens once the e-script is granted for that specific one.
An entity has exported samples from India to outside India. Can that entity claim the benefits of RoadTap?
Not really, because they won't get any foreign currency against it, right? So on the face of it, while there is nothing different that is happening, while you're also still filing shipping bill, you have your product in place. You may even assign some value to it, but eventually if you're not getting any money against it, if these are going as sample, then better not, then don't apply for it, because otherwise you may have to reverse it later on.
A textile manufacturer and exporter can claim RoSCTL along with the RoadTap?
Yeah, again, a very valid question, and maybe I missed that during the session, is that for textile, there is a separate scheme which is RoSCTL, okay, which is only for textile sector, that it had come up separately. That will continue as this. So then you won't get RoadTap benefits. It's kind of either or.
Can an entity get the benefit of RoadTap in case of merchanting-based transactions?
So if you are a contract manufacturer, supporting manufacturer, and the merchant exporter is exporting, then you would get the benefit.
Whether RoadTap benefit can be claimed for the services provided outside India?
No, this is only for goods. This is not for services. So, frankly, again, something which is a valid discussion is if this RoTEP scheme comes up for goods, then what about services? Will there be any benefit for services? Because nobody knows the fate of even SEIS. Now, this FTP is still there. It got recently some extension till next year. But whether even for the last year, if SES rates will be notified is something which we don't have clarity upon. What today we have is only for 1920 that we got incentive rate. Even for next year, we don't know if the rates are out. And if the new FTP scheme will have the rates is something nobody, I mean, even the SES scheme will get continued in the new scheme is something which nobody knows. Um, so to that extent, uh, what is in store for service providers in the new foreign trade policy? We don't know, but definitely they're not covered in RoadTep. There is always discussion that we get to hear is that they may have some new scheme come up for services. Okay, it may not be in exactly like SEIS, but there could be some new scheme that may come up. But whether in what form and what shape is something which we don't know today, and definitely not in RoadTep.
A work contractor and have been executing works contract internationally, can he claim the benefit of RoTEP?
Works contractor exporting goods. That's what you're saying, right?
No, he is just executing works contract internationally.
Okay.
Can he claim the benefit of RoadTep?
We'll have to check because jobbing contracts are something which are out. They are in the ineligible list. But actually, these are not jobbing ones. Jobbing generally would mean that goods had got out, only some work was done over here and then got exported. Ideally, if I think should be available even for works contractor exporting goods for the international contracts, but something we'll have to see closely. I don't see any prohibition per se, but still maybe you can try and explore it, and just in terms of contract value and how the valuation will be posted on the shipping bill. If all these modalities are taken care of, should be eligible.
I think that one thing should be there in that context. I think so, because that one is we are going for that one is supply of goods also over there, and along with that also people are provision of services also there, so that the services
Right.
part will be excluded and the goods supply of goods will be included RoadTep. I think so.
Yes, you're right, sir. I mean, because obviously the benefit is not for services, so that has to be separated out. And even for goods, you will have to somewhere separate out the amount. If that can be done, you have to show the receipt also accordingly. So how the invoicing is happening, how the contract is being designed, all that might have some impact and which has to be seen closely. But technically, if you see these are export of goods which are manufactured in India, then they should be eligible for even this benefit.
What is the role of classification of the goods for the purpose of claiming the benefit of RoadTep?
Very relevant role, because eventually the rate is decided basis the HSN only. So you will have to have the classification done correctly, pick up the right HSN, only then you will get that rate which is aligned with that HSN. Obviously, deciding classification is more product driven, not exactly incentive driven. So you would have to somewhere classify the product correctly basis its character and looking at all the classification related rules which are there. Decide the HSN. Once you freeze on to HSN of your product, only then look at the all industry rate or the RoadTep which is prescribed against that product.
You have to throw upon that one is how an entity compute the impact assessment of RoadTep in the business of the entity.
So impact assessment, as in pretty simple, you will have to maybe map all the products which are getting exported, identify the rate which is prescribed against those products specifically. If you want to even compare it with MEIS, you have to go back and understand what was the MEIS benefit out of it. I'm sure, I mean, most of the cases, this rate has gone down. Could be some exceptions, but you will have to see that closely and identify which is the rate which is applicable, and see the impact on even the revenue and the maybe P&L that was originally there considered making MEIS.
Whether the road tax benefit can be claimed on the export of goods exempted from the GST?
Yes, so frankly, there is no connection as such with the GST exemptions per se. This has to be seen more for from a road tax annexure perspective.
What would be the impact on the road tax benefit if entity has been selected as a risky exporter?
So they say that there is RMS consideration which is there, but frankly, I'm not fully aware about the risky proposition. Maybe we'll have to check that specifically, in what sense the risk assessment had happened and what is the remark that has been put in for a particular exporter, or is it for particular product. Accordingly, you will have to kind of consider.
Whether the e-credit script issued under road tax scheme can be used for making payment of additional duties of custom or IGST?
No, it's only for BCD, not even for SWS.
Goods exported by the entity, used goods, whether the road tax benefit could be claimed in respect of such goods?
Sorry, I missed that. Can you come again?
The goods exported by an entity are used goods.
Yeah,
Whether
so
road tax
that's
benefit
not
could
allowed.
be
That's
claimed
not
in the
allowed.
Huh?
That's not eligible for road tax. It's clearly in the ineligible list.
Okay.
Used goods export.
Whether the road tax benefit can be claimed on the goods exported through e-commerce operator?
Should be allowed. There is no there is no restriction on that. Just that in terms of modalities, who will claim it, how it will be claimed, has to be seen. Who's filing the documentation for export in terms of shipping bill and all. That has to be seen. But in principle, this is not into ineligible criteria.
Whether there would be any audit by the department to validate the correctness of claims made by the entity?
For road tax, you're saying yes, that's very much possible. There is also even possibility of they suspending it, or there is recovery proceedings which are there. So definitely there'll be some monitoring mechanism which will be in place.
What is the eligibility criteria for existing companies under automotive vehicle and component manufacturing?
Eligibility criteria.
PLI scheme I am talking about.
Yeah. So we did speak about it, right? So global revenue conditions are there, global investment criteria are there, which are for all for existing ones. Newer ones rather has a much different and a stringent one. Otherwise, the ones that we spoke on in detail are for existing manufacturers only.
How will the global group revenue of the applicant company from auto OEM and or auto component manufacturing segments be calculated if same group of company is claimed and considered for two or more applicant companies?
I did mention that applicant will be only one entity. Okay, applicant only for group calculation, group turnover basis, it will get clubbed together. But as an applicant, it will be only single entity who can make the application.
The PLI scheme requires investment to be spread over 5 years. However, given the nature of the industry, the incremental investment may not be allocated as per the PLI investment.
So it's possible that at the beginning you may have projected your investment in a typical fashion, and expecting it to move in a certain way, and practically it may not exactly go in that fashion, because depending on business requirements and how overall business is growing, it may either grow also, or it may even go down. So that's something which is possible. They've also thought through. The policy specifically mentions that it is possible that in one of the years maybe we do not reach the benchmark that we had kind of committed at the beginning. In that case, for that particular year, you may not get the benefit. But in the next year, if you kind of compensate and make it up to the original investment, or even additionally for the next year, then for those years where you kind of fulfill the criteria of minimum investment into that year, only for those years the incentive will be benefit incentive will be granted. Rest all years you would not get it. So it's also very important that at the time of granting the investment also, they may, and something which is valid and to be considered is, they may even want you to kind of give some bank guarantee and undertaking that you will actually invest as much, because the point is that there could be few more who may not really get into the investment PLI benefit because you had committed so and so. So, and if you do not do that, then to that extent, the overall incentive, maybe allocation itself has gone down. So they may want you to give a bank guarantee that at least you're committed now to make this much investment. The year-wise outlay may change, and accordingly your benefit might change, but eventually you should reach that golden number that you had committed.
What if an applicant company is not able to achieve threshold criteria for a given year?
So that's what I said. Even if it's in one of the years you do not reach the threshold criteria, you won't get it for that year. The year you reach it, only for those years you will be eligible.
Whether interest during construction, pre-operative expenses and administrative expenses to purchase plant machinery included in the eligible investment?
So as I said, the even building construction material is covered only to the extent of 10% of minimum investment criteria. Beyond that, it won't be allowed.
Is the expenditure incurred on land and building covered under this PLI scheme?
Land is excluded. Building is somewhere covered, but with a cap.
Can new AIT products be added to the initial application over the course of time?
Again, a very critical question and valid one, but we don't know, frankly. Today, today somebody may, the list when it is out, and if your product is not there, whether there will be a second list is something which cannot be seen right now. There can be a possibility, you can still, nobody's stopping you from making a representation, but whether that will go through is something which we cannot say right now.
When can an applicant submit a claim for disbursement under the PLI scheme?
Okay, so first the application, it's a 60-day window which will open up when the application opens up. That time you will only have to make an application for becoming eligible, and the incentive will be granted to that applicant at the beginning. The first disbursement happens only after the year of operation. So first year of incentive is 22-23. So in the year 23-24, you will make actually the application for disbursement of incentive. Right now, what will happen is only eligibility. The disbursement application happens year on year after the completion of the year.
What would happen if a selected applicant exists midway?
Yeah, so again, a tricky one. As I said, they may have the bank guarantees and some bonds which will be taken, and that may get encashed. And if there's some genuine reason, they may consider it. But chances are then such guarantees may get even encashed in such a scenario.
Is there any penalty for not meeting the cumulative domestic investment determined sales value during the tenure of the scheme?
Frankly, not that I'm aware of. As of now, the guidelines are not talking about any such penalty. Maybe the idea is such borderline cases may not even go through. Only as I said, since it's all about ranking, only the top ones may still sail through all the criteria which is there, and those may not really get into such a marginal cases of not being able to meet even the minimum ones. But yes, you're right. Condition may come up that for some reason somebody who had estimated could not do it. That kind of contingency is possible, and in that case, how it will happen as of now, at least the guidelines not very clear on that. They may come up with something.
How the incentive will be calculated under this PLI scheme?
Okay, so I think how part of it we discussed in detail. It has to be seen on the base year, and base year turnover has to be deducted from the existing year's turnover. See the condition of minimum sale revenue and minimum investment. If that gets fulfilled, then there are slabs which have been decided up to 250. There'll be 8%. Then from 250 to 500, there is another percentage like that. Cumulatively, it gets calculated.
What is the procedure and documentation requirement for the re-entry of manufactured goods returned by the customer for repair in the premises?
Re-entry of?
Re-entry of manufactured goods returned by the customer for repair in the premises.
Is this for more lessons or is it
more? Yeah, more.
Okay, so frankly, as such, there's no separate procedure. Okay, so let's look at two scenarios. In first scenario where it's a domestic clearance and domestic customer has sent it back. That's a simple one because you've already cleared them, paid the duty. Ex-bond bill of entry is being filed. Now goods are coming up. You rather only have to keep a separate track of it to say that these were duty paid goods only which had come back, and now we're repairing it and sending it back. If it's a export customer who had sent it back, where you have to get it, repair it, and send it back, then might as well keep a track. You have to mention it as for re-export. Okay, at the time of import itself, file it as a part of into bond bill of entry only because you still have the benefit of mover license. So then you import file into bond bill of entry, do whatever repair is to be done, and then export is. That's just a logical flow that I'm thinking about. Not really that I don't think they've covered anything specifically for this into FAQs.
Ma'am, right now, no more questions.
Okay.
We are thankful to you for that one is nice derivation, and that one is you have cleared all the queries whatsoever is coming into you, so that in the irrespective, once again, I am just pointing it out, irrespective of your bad health, you have come to this forum and you have deliberated in that one as particular in that nice way. We are thankful to you. We once again expect many more sessions from you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you
very much, and thank you for so many questions. It really helps to know that the session was really thought-provoking, that I'm getting so many questions. Happy to know about it. And if maybe I've missed out something or any specific questions, maybe you can post it to sir and it will reach to me separately, or you can also reach out to me on that one. Okay, thank you everyone.
Thank you to all the participants also.
Yes, thank you for patient listening and all your questions. Thank you.